This morning we were reading from Isaiah 65, about God bringing a new creation, building something, creating something. It reminded me of something I liked to do when I was little. And I was little once, really long time ago. I loved to play with Legos. Anybody like Legos? I love Legos. I think we have a few pieces over in there with some of the kids' stuff. But I liked to build cars and boats and cities, planes, rockets, campsites, houses, forts, streets, swimming pools. No, not quite all of those things. But I liked to build little towns, little cities. I liked to build people. I even got some of the things with the motors and made little trucks. I was hoping to find one at home and bring one of my little trucks today so that you guys could play with it at fellowship, but I couldn't find it. But I love building, creating, making something happen. I also love to build things that are life-size and even larger than life. Houses, music, churches, symphonies, communities. Creating is refreshing, it's energizing and wonderful. How many of you like to make things? Something, even if you're drawing on a piece of paper. Maybe creating a friendship. That's creative as well. Seeing something that we create, seeing it then destroyed and devastated is awful. It's pure distress. It's painful. It's frustrating. It doesn't matter whether you're 3 or 5, 30, 40, 60. If you have something that you have created and something comes along and destroys it, whether it's a person or a storm, it's devastating. Today and last week, we are very mindful of devastation in the Philippines. We've been mindful ourselves of Katrina. We've been mindful of Haiti, of all of these places that have endured catastrophes. Sometimes we're mindful of our own pain when we see that. We're reminded. I looked at the Philippines and was grateful that the 2 instances in my life when I went through what I thought were devastating storms were really minor. I had one, I was at a jazz festival in Shreveport, Louisiana, and a tornado came through and blew down the tent in which I was, and the center pole came down right on my head. I ended up with about 36 staples in my head and couldn't work for a couple months. But I survived. Had some time off. That was kind of nice. Hair grew back. I had a big tree in my yard that got blown down by another tornado. The tree was a big pine tree and it was 50 feet tall and it fell down and it missed the neighbor's awning on their side window by about 8 inches. So, I guess it was good it came down and didn't hurt anything except my chain link fence. Had some nice firewood for a long time. But nonetheless, feeling like I couldn't work because I'd been bonked on the head, seeing the chain link fence that I actually learned how to build and put up myself be destroyed by my tree was devastating. Seeing the Philippines torn apart is devastating. We have neighbors in our next building, a congregation that is primarily Filipino, and I hope that those of us that can walk next door and at least express our prayers and communicate that we are praying for them, and each of us doing what we can through all the various agencies, through the UCC's efforts, and through whatever other charity efforts you're working with, continue to help to rebuild that. It can be rebuilt. It can be recovered. God can work through the whole of humanity to do that. And that's part of what we're talking about today. Recreation. We look ahead and we remember painful destruction and devastation. But this reading today from Isaiah gives us a recreative hope in the midst of pain and anguish. The reading spoke of hope for the people who had lost so much in the time it was written. It still inspires that recreative hope today, much like last week's lesson from Haggai. God speaking says this: "Be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating. Before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear." Before we even call, God answers us. God is still creating. God is still speaking. God is still listening. We are part of that. We're part of what God is doing. We become inspired by God. We are co-creators. Hands, feet, eyes, ears, mouths. We build. We bring those ideas to fruition. We make babies and bring new generations. We work together for a better church. We work together for a better community. We work together for a better nation and a better world. It all requires working together. It all requires listening to that God that is still speaking. We are God's voice. We speak for justice. We speak with kindness and gentleness to one another. We speak with passion to issues before us every single day and to challenges that are before us. Our families, our communities, our congregation, our nation, our world. All of those things give us recreative possibilities. And there are no limits to what God can do. Those possibilities are infinite. How do we get there? We listen. We listen for God's voice. We listen for God's guidance. We listen to each other. We even listen to viewpoints that aren't the same as ours. Sometimes we learn from that. We listen so we can find ways to follow God's ways in our lives, our families, our church, community, nation, and world. You see, I keep saying lives, families, church, community, nations, and world. That's on purpose, right? On purpose. That we start looking from our small place to our big, wide place, even our universe. That's sort of the flavor of our reading of the day. Now, God says, "Be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating." So God is calling for rejoicing, building, planting, working, family raising, cooperation, all of those things. So why don't we always do that? It's easy to look at what's wrong. It's really easy to make a list of shortfalls. And the people of Isaiah's time, Haggai's time, they've always been faced with all of these problems and difficult situations. Here, right here, in Ontario, Los Angeles, Southern California, the signs and the stresses of poverty and economic injustice are just about everywhere. There's hardly anywhere you can go that there isn't somebody in need. The news, sometimes I don't even want to watch the news. Somebody else has been shot. Some young person brought a gun to school. Some person of color has been shot by some neighbor because they felt threatened when they came to their door for help. 14-year-old goes to school with a gun and is suspended. Then we find out that he's sent home to a home where he'd been so abused that he felt desperate enough to bring a gun to school. Girls are kidnapped and finally free after how many years of that crazy story in Chicago? Drugs, payday loans, all these things that destroy people. Schools are struggling, storefronts are empty. Because we experience that now, maybe, just maybe, we can kind of understand how these people around 475 or so BC, these people in Isaiah's story, how they felt. 2 generations after they returned from exile, they try to rebuild their city. They remember all their former glory. We have a few people in our congregation here who probably lived in Ontario when it was in its downtown former glory. If we don't have those, we can go to the library. There's a very cool film on which we even see our own church with literally hundreds of people streaming in and out of it. We remember this former glory, and we look at the current downtown Ontario, and it doesn't quite measure up. They looked at their temple, and it didn't measure up to the glory of Solomon's temple. Imagine Isaiah in his prophet's robes running through the city, looking at it, at the devastation and what was still torn apart and needing rebuilding. You can look at our own newscasts from, say, Afghanistan, Libya, Philippines, and get an idea of what that might be like. Much of his city at the time was still in ruins. Lots of people were suffering dislocation. There was lots of hunger and illness. Here, this first generation that had come back, they were excited and joyful. And yet, by the time we get to this third Isaiah, and he's writing these beautiful words, they are still hungering for hope. Then Isaiah speaks of this vision of God. He is about to do a new thing, to create new heavens and earth. Be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating. I am about to create a new Jerusalem as a joy and its people as a delight. We're the current version, you know. We are being recreated every day. Right now, we're in a season where we consider that. The big bad word is called stewardship season. But we're considering what we're doing and how we're rebuilding and how dedicated we are to that and what we're going to do about it. No matter how tough it is, no matter how big of a challenge we face, God still calls for rejoicing. He says, they shall not hurt or destroy. What I get from that is that those people that are, I'm not talking about any of you, I'm just talking about the world in general, okay? Don't take this personally. People that are lashing out at people, belittling people, attacking viewpoints just for being different, or deciding it's important to push somebody out of the way to get ahead, those people are working contrary to God's call. God's call is to, what's that first word? Rejoice! You got it. Good. Build, plant, work, cooperate. In sadness we mourn. At injustice we are angry. And too often we feel hopeless. Yet, God calls us all to continue to live in hope, to rejoice. We read these words from Isaiah many, many centuries after they were written, after the destruction of Jerusalem, after the return from exile, after the life and ministry of Jesus in the time, after the fall of empires. but we persist in the belief, the trust that is at the core of Israel's story and at the core of our own story, that God is at work for the good of all God's children, no matter how things appear at this very moment. What is our role? What is our role in this process, in this promise? Our role is this: we are called to join in God's creative project. At least that's one way of seeing our ministry. God's project. We are called to join in. It's not some kind of pie-in-the-sky hope. Something as mundane as just having bread for everybody is a huge project, a huge labor of love. The Fifth Fridays, where we provide dessert, it's a big project for us. The last Saturdays, providing pet food, a big project for us. The Symphony, providing arts and music for our community, big project for us. They all require labors of love. Sometimes they require some huge, major, giant, uncomfortable adjustments in our lives. Coming over here every Saturday morning and practicing. Coming over here every last Saturday and working on the pet food. Making sure we have dessert ready for the Fifth Friday. It's all work. It's all adjustments. And it's all really worth it. We are dreaming not just of bread and pet food and symphonies, but we're dreaming of God's recreation of community. We are dreaming of justice. We're dreaming of peace. We're dreaming of rejoicing, of God's creation. There's an author by the name of M. Scott Peck, whose words I often like to read and enjoy. One of his quotes is this: "The truth is that our finest moments are most likely to occur when we are feeling deeply uncomfortable, unhappy, or unfulfilled. For it is only in such moments, propelled by our discomfort, that we are likely to step out of our ruts and start searching for different ways or truer answers. We seek those answers because we trust in God, and we trust that God is with us on our journey. God is still listening. God is still speaking. God is still creating. Let's join God." As a note, while Sandy's going to the piano,